Yeah, I mean, other than the colorful variety, these just
16.
look like office supplies.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just that you show people like us a set of pens with 20 colors or something, and we're going to try to draw with them
Yeah.
in some way or the other.
Yeah. Hello, and welcome to Stationery Test Drive, where every week we take strange tools and exotic tools and very humble tools, and we do fun things with them. I'm Vishal.
I'm Samir.
This is Minjal, and today we're looking at the Stabilo Point 88 Fineliners.
They look like pencils, first of all. I'm guessing that has some history, which we'll get into with Samir. But the .88s are 0.4 fine. That's what it says.
So that is the line width.
And yeah, I guess it is a 0.4. It's a very ratty 0.4. But before we get into all that complaining, which we have plenty of, so spoilers for the episode, I guess. Samir, why don't you tell us about the Stabilo company? Or as I used to know them, the Schwan company.
The Schwan company, as you used to know them, and they are still the Schwan-Stabilo group.
Because there is a swan, which I assume in German is Schwan,
Yes.
on the logo.
This company started in 1855 with a duo of German names, which I will not try to pronounce. 10 years later, they started as a pencil company in Nuremberg,
Okay.
very close to the Staedtler and Faber-Castell and all of those. So they all started around the same time in the same area.
And hopefully near a pond with swans.
That happened later.
Okay.
So 10 years later, by 1865 or so, these people were in deep financial trouble.
That quickly.
And the company was bought over by a man whose family name was Schwan.
Ah.
And that's where the Schwan company came to be. The interesting thing about the Schwan company is that in, I think, the 1870s or the late 1860s, they were one of the first people to have a registered trademark,
Wow.
which you can still see here. It's a little swan,
It says, yeah.
and that has stuck since then, and it's one of the first registered trademarks ever.
So it's an old logo in the legal sense.
Yeah.
In that most logos don't actually get registered and until the company is big enough. But
So they started as a pencil company. They continued as the Schwan company into the 1900s. They were a very popular pencil company in even through the Great Depression, where they then started making pencils specifically so that they would be cheaper and more affordable to people. And something about this pen is actually from that time, which is that during the Great Depression or the 1920s sometime, they had an entire batch of pencils which came out defective, which was that the coating paint of the pencil didn't cover the entire pencil and there were these white lines left over.
oh, okay.
And people just started identifying that so much with the company that they made that their style.
And then Staedtler down the road was like, you know what, we're going to do that, but it'll be black.
No, but Staedtler has alternating black
Right.
faces. The fact that there's a line on the edge of these things is because they had a batch of pencils that did not get painted properly. And they
just
continued that, and because they were a pencil company for a good 100 years by then, when they made these pens, they just continued that style.
Yeah, so that explains why they look so much like pencils. Have any of you used a Schwan pencil? I don't seem to
I don't
recall
think I
having,
have.
because I've only ever seen these.
I think what is popular in India as well is the .88.
Yeah.
So a lot of doodle and Zentangle artists prefer this medium.
Well, that's what I'm doing with it right now.
And the .88 was invented in 1977. Maybe 88 has something to do with 77. I don't know.
Or maybe it's some kind of multiple of 0.4.
Possible. and it was one of their first pens. They had been making pens since the 1950s. And this is still one of their most popular products. This is the best-selling fine liner in all of Europe.
Well, it is best-selling, but I was not actually very pleased with it. And I say this from a point of view of someone who uses fine liners a lot. From the Unipin, especially, is one of my favorites. And this one is functional. It's, like I said, it's a ratty 0.4 in the sense that it's an even line, but frankly, at this point in time in 2022, I expect more from fine liners. There's been just so much improvement in the line quality, in just the longevity. It's like this yellow one, which I ended up using. This is the smoothest line I've been able to get out of it, because yesterday when I was making my test drive, I used it for hours and all I could get was a much rattier line than this. So this is Stationery Test Drive, and we do test these things out with our own skills. We're artists, designers, and calligraphers. And as an illustrator, this is what I came up with this particular set of Schwan-Stabilos. It is... I mean, I'm happy with the piece, more or less, but I was not happy with the piece for 90% of the time I was using it. Like I said, it's a bit of a ratty pen. The yellow that I used yesterday, now it seems to have maybe warmed up a little, but one of the convenient and great things about fine liners is that you can just put them down quickly and effectively and evenly, or with at least some level of an interesting line to them. This one it's just very noodly, and I had to eventually just kind of lean into that noodling by just kind of abandoning any hope of making nice prim and proper animal study, and then just maybe just turning it into graffiti, which is an odd thing to say for a fine liner.
It is good graffiti.
Thank you, but yeah, it's I would like to follow this style again and try it out, but maybe with the Unipin or with some other fine liners that we have, because just the amount of kind of groping around to get a decent line here, especially with these yellows, I don't know. I mean, yes, it's a best-selling pen, and I wouldn't say no to just using it if that's all I had around.
I think part of the problem we are having is that we come from an artistic background, and all of our other examples of what we call a fine liner are artistic pens. This one is not. Right. This is the best-selling fine liner, technically what is called a fine liner in Europe, because it is not used by artists. It's used by normal people.
And it's used mostly as a writing
tool, note-taking tool, those kind of things. Now, if you were to say what is the best-selling fine liner in the US, it's not going to be the Unipin fine liner. It's going to be the Pilot Office Blue fine liner or one of those things.
True.
So it's also that we come to this from an artistic point of view, and because it comes in this brilliant range of colors, you kind of expect it to work as an artistic tool, but I think it's just not quite the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not dissatisfied with it, but Minjal, what did you end up doing?
So I call this pencil shavings in color.
Ooh, how artistic.
No, I will not. I've struggled with using the Stabilos so much. There was a point when I wanted to throw them against the wall, but
would that make art?
Yeah, maybe. Now, again, I was telling Samir that I have newfound respect for Zentangle and doodle artists. I realized that when you start a piece like this, you just have to commit to it like 1000%. Like, even if it means, drawing, say, 600 lines, at a time, you just have to finish the piece. And I'm not somebody who really enjoys doing that. I don't find Zentangles meditative or easy to begin with. So, and these pens, they're problematic in the sense that they're not a fine liner. They're not a felt pen. they're not, I don't know, like they're not really pencil-like. I just found it very difficult to kind of, do anything with it.
You seem to have gotten a much more even and almost thick line closer to the 0.4 that I would expect from a different type of pen. I got these very ratty and noodly things. What kind of pressure were you applying?
I was just going to say that. Now, I usually, because I'm used to using the Pilot parallel pen, there is a fair bit of pressure that I use, whether I'm drawing or using Fineliners. So, which is why I had to, I managed to get these kind of strokes.
Yeah, whereas mine, most of them, unless I was really pressing down, much harder than even I would like to, which I usually think I'm a very heavy hand. I was not getting that until I pushed it in really hard.
And the good thing is that you were using a paper that's, of fairly substantial. So you could do that. Because the other thing I did find with these pens is that they do blot quite easily.
They're water-based. The ink is water-based. So yes, there is a lot of blotting, smudging.
Yeah, I'm glad I used this a smooth paper. So did you.
Yeah.
Samir, what did you use? Because you, I'm guessing, got to see a lot different.
I did this, and yes, I did get to face some of the blotting because I used plain printer paper. So this is like a 70 or 80 GSM at best.
Not really coated, not pressed into oblivion. So it has some tooth and it has a lot of absorption.
Yeah, but if you hold and I discovered quite quickly that I couldn't depend on it to not blot. But in some of the early places, like here you can see, if you just hold the point there for a second, it's going to start forming a large dot there. So, yeah, the blotting is definitely an issue with these, which I've not, again, come across with the other fine liners that we call... Again, I think the problem is that here where it's semantics. Yes, this is a fine liner because it has a fine point. But I don't think it's just not the kind of instrument that we are used to calling a fine liner. The difference is that when felt tip pens were invented in the 50s or 60s or whatever, and then people kept improving on how fine you could get that point. This is probably one of the early versions of how that is, which is you just take a felt tip pen and then you make it a much thinner point. Which is fine for writing, for doodling, for note-taking, all of those things. Now, the things that we have gotten used to, things like the Unipin fine liner, the microns, those are all fine liners in that they are fine, but they are actually more like technical pens.
Right. They have more in common with the rotring
exactly
than they do with the sketch pen.
With the sketch pen. This is still a sketch pen with a water-based ink and a dye. Whereas a micron or a unipin has a pigment-based ink which is permanent, which is why you can watercolor over it without worrying about the lines. So in some ways, the term fine liner is being used too broadly now for two separate things, just because of the size rather than how they work.
I think you can get unique things out of this type of pen. I don't know if I want to get it out of this particular pen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the thing we need to compare this to is probably most sketch pens, which we have covered. We did a plain sort of...
The domes.
Dome sketch pen for kids.
Which were ridiculously cheap, so we loved them. They were, 20 rupees?
Look, I'll just interrupt here. When I was practicing at home, I tried using the pens to fill color. Like you would with a sketch pen.
Right.
And it's not an enjoyable experience at all.
No, it's not, because it's just too thin.
Yeah, the intangible thing here that we're all getting to is that it's not an enjoyable experience. Technically, it might be a perfectly reasonable pen. You might be using it for
writing
and all and be completely fine with it. But for a certain type of artistic need, which we all have, there are better pens than this. Probably better price point as well, right?
I think Stabilo also has fine liners. The
artistic fine liners.
What
do they call those?
Yeah. I believe they're called the Stabilo Sensor, if I'm not mistaken.
Sensor?
I'm not very sure. Maybe the name is incorrect, but they do have a range that is meant for artists.
Okay.
So while these are marketed as fine liners, like you said, it's about semantics. They don't really work for us.
I mean, to be fair to them, none of their marketing ever mentions this to be an artistic tool. It's always about work, offices, students taking notes,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, other than the colorful variety, these
16.
just look like office supplies.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just that, you show people like us a set of pens with, 20 colors or something, and we're going to try to draw with them
Yeah.
in some way or the other.
Yeah. And if you're the kind of person who's stuck in an office and you have a set of these, well, clearly you can make things with them that are not your usual use for office stationery.
And they're not, prohibitively expensive or unaffordable. They're all right. They're economical.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's several things going for it.
So I think we haven't tested this out a lot, but maybe just writing notes in a certain way, or kind of maybe not, the thing is that even when Minjal does try to write something, she's writing it from the point of view of a letterer, which is not the same as taking notes quickly.
Yes.
Right.
And maybe these work for that purpose, because they don't, when we try to draw with them like an artist and try to get an even line, no, they're not good at that.
Also, I think, just personally speaking, as someone with kind of pudgy hands, I never liked holding these. They're too thin. Like, I'm fine with pencils being this way, because pencils, you kind of hold them in a certain light way, and that's kind of what we end up with. Putting pressure on something this thin is not
Right.
comfortable. It's not nice. There are several other, I don't want to get a holder for that, So there are all these just kind of quality of life things that there are now so many other better versions of. The unipins that we keep harping on about are greater because they are a full regular barrel sized. These are ultra thin. Those are easier to hold. They have a better place to keep your hand, because here you're just sort of on the barrel, which is never actually great. The unipins have this area which is just slightly better than this and nice and round and sort of where your finger rests. So that is always nicer to use that way.
I think to some extent, as I said, we are kind of misidentifying this pen, but also these pens are probably a victim of their own success, in that they were invented in 1970, and 1977 is when they were introduced, and maybe even the company themselves would have now better ideas of how this one should look or work or be held, but I'm fairly sure that if they changed the way it looked, people would not buy it anymore.
Yeah, people have. No, and look, we, like we said at the top, we approach things from unusual ways. We approach the usual tools from unusual ways, and unusual things from even more unusual ways. And these are unusual uses for this. You probably love the Stabilo Point 88. And please tell us in the comments what you use it for. Maybe you even use it for art and you love it. If you're into zentangles and things like that. We aren't quite into that.
Yeah, because I think just having this kind of range of colors, and this is barely half of the set that these are from, and being able to just kind of switch between them, and the fact that they have a cap that's easy to put at the back, these are all like very simple, usable instruments. Best artistic tool, probably not.
Now, because I get a lot of my reference from Pinterest and YouTube as well, there are nearly 200, 300 videos of people using these in their journals.
Right.
So this is obviously fantastic, if you're into bullet journals and,
exactly,
making scrapbooks or, just sitting and drawing 1,000 lines. Maybe it'll work, if that's the kind of stuff you like doing.
And I think it's also to do with the difference we are seeing between these two and this one, which is that Minjal has put a good amount of pressure on it. And I think people who are journaling or writing in notebooks and things are more likely to do that, whereas Vishal and me tend to think like artists, which is
keep it as little pressure
as possible to begin with, and then see how it reacts. And the problem is, when you try to do that, these pens don't react well. When you put the minimum effort into it, you get this extremely non-existent line, which I ended up using only for cross-hatching here, if you can see this area, which is just not strong enough. And then when you do press it a lot, it kind of straight jumps into something like that.
Which, that's the kind of line you can get from any kind of gel pen. So, it's really not...
and that's exactly what we need to think of this as. When these were invented, gel pens didn't exist.
Right. They're 10 years younger than the gel pen, maybe even 15.
So this was the first pen to do something like this, which was to give you this range of colors in an instrument which is like the simplest, most common instrument, even back then.
So I guess we're missing the point here in that this was a pioneer and we respect it and even enjoy parts of it for that.
But if you're trying to cover any sort of area with color, these are just a terrible choice. I mean, but then so are the unipens if you want to cover,
True, but I think Minjal said that when she tried to put down a block of color, it didn't go down as well as a unipin would. So there have been improvements.
No, for sure, because again, the kind of nib or tip that the unipin and those newer pens have is just extremely different from this one. Those seem to have much more of like a cylinder with like a smooth top.
Yeah, it's more machined. Whereas
if you look very closely at this one, it's almost like the tip of it has like a cone on it. That's the shape of it, which is why you can either get a very ratty line by using the very top of it, or you then straight jump over to kind of a thicker line, which is the edge of the cone.
It's the same issue we had with the Brustro metallic brush pens, only those were in a much larger version of that cone. And we had the same issue where the starting pressure of it was deceptive.
And I think that, again, that comes from the fact that something like this is probably great for writing, in that you can get a very even line if you're putting that pressure into it, which you are when you're writing.
Yeah, I mean, my little bit of lettering here is the most even that I could get any of these lines.
Because a lot of these, the ergonomics of things like this is also to do with the fact that we come at it from the point of view of artists who have a certain degree of control over things, which is that we are willing to vary our pressure a lot from very light to...
The tools we want are in...
We want that variety, whereas most people writing want something that just consistently gives you a clean line.
Yes, for all those, bosses and teachers who will then say, I appreciate good handwriting.
And clearly you can press a lot down on these. Whereas I know from personal, experience that a unipin, for example, if you press down on it this much, you're losing that point.
Yeah. It will punish you for it. It almost wants to say, you know what, you need to treat me better. So, this one...
Yeah, I mean, we'd come across this in the DOMS episode. Maybe these are push resistant.
Wow. The things you learn. Well, push resistant swans can find their way into your writing kit. They will not be staying in ours for long, I must say. But we did enjoy them. We did enjoy the experiments in the test drive that we went on. If you enjoyed this test drive, we are here every week testing out something new. And you can follow us at the descriptions and the addresses on screen, as well as please follow Inky Memo, which is this channel and a website, and there's a newsletter where we talk about the history of pens, as we have talked here, the history of the culture of the people involved in stationery, and all sorts of other interesting and fun and obscure stories just like that. But please do like and subscribe this video, this channel, this video, and to us if you like these things. We will be back next week with more stationery test drives, more tools, more humble tools, more exotic tools, more unusual takes on usual things, and usual takes on unusual things, just to show you that all of that is possible. Until then, I'm Vishal.
I'm Samir.
This is Minjal.
And suck my cloaca, you apes.